Welcome back, everybody. Well, the White House hopes to double exports in 5 years as part of its effort to get American companies hiring. The man in charge of the export initiative is Robert Hormats, Undersecretary of State for Economic, Energy, and Agricultural Affairs. He's a former vice chairman of Goldman Sachs International and has served Republican and Democratic presidents, including Nixon, Reagan, and Carter. He joins Matt and me here in studio. Bob, great to have you here with us.
Terrific to be here.
So are we going to do this? I mean, can we double exports in 5 years? Are we really taking the steps at this point to get to that goal?
I think we actually can for a variety of reasons. First of all, a lot of American companies are still very competitive. And you can see that in the export statistics that we've seen already. Second, we're using our embassies, our ambassadors all around the world are making a concerted effort to support American businesses. Third, we're working domestically, particularly with small, medium-sized companies, to help acquaint them with changing markets, particularly the emerging markets, which are really the fastest growing markets in the world. And fourth, we're bringing a lot of ambassadors back from various parts of the world, particularly, for instance, the Middle East ambassadors. Many of them are going to be in New York in a few weeks to launch a large road show where they go to various parts of the country and help companies, particularly small, medium-sized companies that don't export as much, to understand these fast-growing markets and how to take advantage of these markets.
How hard is it to avoid, I think I heard the president talking to the UN last week saying that we'd managed to get this far without resorting to really protectionist measures. How important is that to the administration, and how hard is it to avoid that?
Well, I think the administration has done very well in avoiding protectionist measures, and most countries have. We really have not seen a lot of protectionist measures, certainly nothing compared to what we saw in the 20s and 30s with a very sharp downturn. They've been held to a minimum. But we're doing another thing that is helpful, and that is where we do see other countries imposing measures against American companies, we're going to take tough action. We have a rules-based global system. And where we find countries that are dumping or subsidizing, there are international rules that we're able to utilize to go after them. Our preferred goal is to negotiate differences out, but if need be, we'll defend American interests, largely because we won't have credibility to negotiate new trade agreements unless we enforce the old ones. We also are dealing with very important issues like protection of intellectual property, because American companies' economic strengths, particularly their competitive strengths internationally, depend on copyrights, patents, innovative types of productive capabilities. And if other countries pirate those or force the transfer of those from American companies to their own national champions, it'll undermine our ability to export and our economic future. So we're taking a very tough line, but we're also trying to negotiate agreements like the Korean U.S. Free Trade Agreement, KORUS. We're trying to put the finishing touches on it so it can get through the Congress. That would be very helpful.
I feel like we haven't addressed the elephant in the living room, and that is China. As you know, we're really pressing them right now on their currency. You know, you can't miss the millions of stories being about the prospect of a trade war and a currency war with China. Where do you think we need to be in terms of Chinese policy to protect and cultivate American jobs?
Well, Secretary Geithner is dealing with the currency issue, but on the other parts...
But you know it's all kind of
But there are other things that we can do, and in fact are doing, to ensure that we have greater opportunities in China. Protection of intellectual property is one thing. Also, the Chinese have this policy called indigenous innovations, where they determine that foreign companies operating in China, investing in China, will have barriers imposed to their ability to sell to the government of China. So we're trying to be sure that there's a level playing field in China so that American companies can export more to China and American companies can sell to the Chinese government. So we want a level playing field with China. We want them to play by global rules. And over time, as they become greater players in the global system, they'll have an interest in adhering to these global rules.
Do they get it? Because I think we've wanted a level playing field for years now in terms of dealing with China. Do they understand? Are they really taking the steps to have a level playing field? They've
improved certain things in intellectual property protection, but they have a substantial way to go. Particularly, their rules in many cases are written in a way that you and I would find quite acceptable. But in many cases, they don't enforce those rules. That's a big problem. This indigenous innovation, which makes as a precondition for selling to the government the requirement to transfer intellectual property to Chinese companies. That we oppose very strongly. We have our core economic interests. We're talking to the Chinese, and we'll enforce our rights with the Chinese. But over a period of time, I think the Chinese are going to be investing more abroad, so they want their companies to have a level playing field. If they want them to have a level playing field abroad, they have to have a level playing field for our companies in China. If they want their intellectual property protected abroad, they have to protect it in China. If they want to avoid such things as counterfeiting of their products, they have to prevent counterfeiting of our products. These are the kind of things we're explaining to the Chinese. They have an interest in the system working for them. And if they want it to work for them, it has to work for us, too. And they have to make these changes. We're making progress, but we need to make more progress.
Can you come back, everybody? We are back with Bob Hormats, Undersecretary of State for Economic, Energy, and Agricultural Affairs. He's a former vice chairman of Goldman Sachs International. Bob, one thing that caught my attention, you were talking about how the Chinese, they're going to care about protection of their intellectual property. I mean, is that really going to become a significant issue going forward?
Well, it's already for us a significant issue because there is a lot of piracy of intellectual property. There are also rules that force the transfer of intellectual property from American and other foreign companies to the Chinese government, and sometimes that goes to Chinese companies as well. Our goal is to work with the Chinese. We don't want a confrontation with the Chinese on this issue.
Do they feel like we're being confrontational at this point?
I think they don't. I think they understand that we're asserting our interests. We've had a lot of consultations and a lot of dialogue with them on this issue. We want them to understand that if they want their companies to enjoy the protection of their intellectual property, and it's growing because they're doing patents all over. They're very innovative. Country is, a lot of innovative companies, then they have to ensure the intellectual property rights of our companies. If need be, we have recourse to certain laws in the United States and certain international laws under the WTO to deal with it, and we will use those if need be. But our goal is to get them to make these fundamental changes, to have the right laws, and very importantly, to enforce them, and to give up the notion that in order to sell to the government of China, you have to transfer your intellectual property to a Chinese company, or they'll only buy products with indigenous innovation, that is to say, indigenous innovation from China. We have to deal with this. It's a very big issue for American companies.
And it's been going on for a long time.
It's going on for a long time, and for our own economic future, because we're trying to move up the product ladder with higher and higher value-added products. And if the Chinese don't let us sell those products, it's going to be very harmful. For the big, innovative American companies, export markets are critical. I also want to add, it's not just China. There are many other countries that do not protect intellectual property the way they should, and will be just as tough on them. It's not discrimination.
What about protectionist measures if you don't do well with negotiations, if you don't do well with the WTO? I mean, you've had a lot of people now in this sort of new political day talking about that, and we heard we had an op-ed by Andy Grove in Business Week talking about the fact that we need to put up tariffs and we need to get these factory jobs back that we've lost. Is that really something that we would be interested in doing?
Well, I would like to see us get more factory jobs back, and I will talk about that in a second. I do not think Andy Grove's prescription is the answer to doing that. We saw in the 1920s and 1930s that protectionism in the United States or any other country is very harmful. So many of our companies depend on foreign markets. If we get into a blame game and a zero-sum type of competition with protectionism in the U.S. and then protectionism abroad, or protectionism abroad, protectionism in the U.S., that really doesn't help. And we've avoided that. Most other countries have avoided it. But we do need to get those jobs back, and particularly in the manufacturing sector. And there are ways of doing this. One is we need to concentrate a lot more on educational reform and improving our school system. If we can't do that, if we don't have a world-class educational system, we're not going to have a world-class economy 10 years, 15 years from now. We have to invest more in infrastructure. That's critically important. That can create a lot of good jobs. The president's proposed an infrastructure development bank that can be very helpful in expanding infrastructure, creating jobs, making our economy more efficient, and getting capital from the rest of the world to do it. Those are the kind of things that can be very helpful.
But a lot to do.
There's a lot to do. We need to strengthen our competitive capabilities at home and invest more in our workers and in research and development and infrastructure, and that will help us to create a lot more jobs.
Bob Hormats, thank you so much.
Thank you.